Y'all know that we love these birth rate articles, and China is in its find out season. Their one child policy was terrible for their own country, and the way they propped up male babies over girl babies is biting them majorly in the butt. How these people couldn't have the foresight to understand that this would happen is beyond me. But I'm not a woman and I'm not in charge of anything. But we're going to read this article from the Washington Post. It says China's demographic crisis means it's going to run out of workers. The biggest challenge China faces right now isn't the Trump administration and its campaign to decouple the world's two biggest economies. It comes from within. China is experiencing population decline on a scale and at a speed the world has never seen. This will create ripples that will be felt across China and the world for decades to come. The impact on China's long-term growth rate could imperil Beijing's mission to become a global power to rival or replace the United States. And the huge shortage of labor will potentially affect supply chains of products, including Barbie dolls, shoes, mobile phones, and electric vehicles. It's almost impossible to reverse a demographic decline, said Louise Liu, the head of Asia economics at research firm Oxford Economics. She estimated China's shrinking workforce could shave 0.5% off of annual GDP over the next decade. Here's how China got into this predicament and what it means for the world. A one-child reality. Central to China's current woes are the population control measures that China introduced in the 1970s. A government campaign to marry later, have fewer children, and have longer gaps between births saw the birth rate come down sharply in the early 1970s. But amid fears that later, lower, fewer was not enough, the Chinese government formally limited most parents to one child in 1979. Authorities often turn to forced sterilizations and abortions to carry out the one-child policy, levying crippling fines for excess births. The harsh approach meant that the one-child policy worked, albeit too well. Birth rates declined precipitously, forcing authorities to ease the policy in 2015 and allow parents to have 2 children in 2016 and then 3 children in 2021. But the birth rates have not rebounded aside from a small post-COVID blip in 2024. In fact, as population control measures were lifted, the birth rate dropped even further from 1.77 children per woman in 2016 to 1.12 in 2021. In the 1970s, right here, this line, it looks like women over in China were having about 6 kids per woman. So they implemented the one-child policy, and in 1980, it looks like it's just over 2 children per woman. And then they were like, nope, 1 kid. And so people were like, bet. And now, even though people can have 2 kids as of 2016, they said, it still hasn't gone up, and actually it's gone down. Because how are you going to get people used to only having 1 child and think it's going to turn around simply because you said so? No, now it's baked into the cake that people are going to have 2 children, but also you limited the amount of girl babies, which means that there's going to be less women of right now because of your stupidity and lack of foresight. Let's get back to the article. It says the following statistic is probably a reflection of the rising cost to raise a child in China, which averages about, it looks like about $75,000, including food, health insurance, and tuition between birth and college graduation, according to a report from the Beijing-based Yuhua Population Research Institute. The cost is even higher in big cities. It costs looks like close to $141,000 to raise a child in Shanghai. The Chinese government is now throwing money at the problem, but it may come as too little too late. Last month, Beijing unveiled a new subsidy of about $500 a year for the first 3 years of a child's life. On social media, some commenters noted they would consider having more children if the subsidy were 10 times what's being offered. Many would-be parents are deterred by the financial and lifestyle burdens that children bring. I'm afraid of having children. I don't want kids. Raising one requires sacrificing too much, especially for women, says Zhao Jiwan, 35, an executive of a tech company in Hangzhou. I have no intention of making that kind of sacrifice. Life is already exhausting, and I don't want to make it even harder. Zhao and her husband of 7 years don't consider themselves to be outliers. In fact, many similar age friends and colleagues have made the same decision. Some people call me selfish, but I don't care. I just want to live my life on my own terms. Fewer weddings, fewer children. To try to turn the tide on the birth rate, the Chinese government is attempting to convince an increasingly skeptical Gen Z to get married. Only 6.1 million Chinese couples registered for marriage in 2024, less than half of the 13.5 million who tied the knot in 2013, according to China's Ministry of Civil Affairs. The marriage rates are a good proxy for future birth rates, given that almost all Chinese children are born to married parents. All right, so this right here says fewer marriages, more divorces. So let's look at the divorces. It looks like the divorces are going up. This is starting in 1990, a small slump up of divorces, I guess per year, a slight decline, and then it's going back up. Now, marriages, on the other hand, let's look at 2010, where marriages were at its high point right over here, or that could be about 2012. And then it's just going down like, so marriages are going down, and we can see because there is a line that is going down. I am no expert, but I can see a decline. Artie Yan, 46, a data analyst from China's eastern Fujian province, is one of those who has no interest in marriage. Getting married, having children, and continuing the family line are not responsibilities or obligations that everyone must fulfill. We only live for a few decades in this world, and we should spend more time enjoying it, Yan said, adding he would use some of his spare time to care for his aging parents. Still, the Chinese state persists at all levels. Universities teach love courses on dating etiquette. Companies ask their single employees to marry within a set time, and local governments have turned to offering cash subsidies for marriages. The government has even moved to curtail public discourse questioning the value of marriage, with state media going so far as to criticize talk show skits that glorify divorce. For those who do get married, the state continues to play an intrusive role. Family planning officials who were once tasked with keeping the birth rate down now pester newlywed women about plans to have children and when their most recent period was. Oh my goodness. An aging population. Not only are there fewer new Chinese, the older Chinese are sticking around longer. China's life expectancy has been ticking up, and the number of people in the elderly population is expected to double in the next 30 years. China's aging population will put unprecedented strain on the country's pension system, which is largely funded through taxpayer revenue. By 2100, according to the UN, there will be more people outside the workforce than within it. All right, here we go. We got a graph that says China is aging. We got the life expectancy, and it's growing larger. It says the average life expectancy at birth reached 79 years old for women. So women are, well, here, obviously they're living longer than men because men are right here. But that's the women that even got to this side of the earth because they took out so many of the girl children at birth or before birth. So this is on them. Oh my goodness, they really jacked themselves up, didn't they? The aging population could create a vicious cycle. Elderly people will need the government to take care of them, said Ji Fujian, a demographer at the University of Wisconsin at Madison. But there will not be enough resources to support the children without enough money for childbearing costs. It will be very difficult to improve the birth rate. A shrinking labor force. For decades, China enjoyed a role as the world's factory, drawing upon its immense labor force to manufacture goods cheaply and quickly. As the number of working-age people in China drops precipitously, that era may now be coming to an end. China's manufacturing capacity currently comprises 30% of the global total, but that will have to decline because China won't have enough labor productivity, Xi said. The collapse of China's manufacturing capacity is unavoidable. It's not just an issue of numbers, it's also an issue of attitude. China, as the world's factory, was primarily made possible through the generation born between 1960 and 1980, Xi said. Those people were very willing to do manufacturing work and work in factories. But now the younger generations simply aren't willing to work in factories. And so right here, you're seeing China's labor force shrinks. So in 2003, they had 9.3 workers. To 2013, 7.6 workers. 2023, 4.4 workers. You can see, obviously, the numbers are getting smaller. And the graph of people is also getting smaller. Other countries have addressed worker shortages through immigration, something that Beijing, which places a premium on cultural homogeneity, has been reluctant to embrace. Instead, China is increasingly looking toward robots to make up for the worker and productivity shortfall, but automation will have limited impact in some sectors, such as service industries. Factories and manufacturers may already be feeling the pinch. Labor costs have risen in the past few years for LC Sign, a Guangzhou-based digital sign manufacturer with around 200 factory workers. We are already facing competition, said Tony Zhu, LC Sign's head of marketing, pointing to sign manufacturers in India, Europe, and Mexico. We aren't the cheapest option. Among our foreign competitors, our prices are a bit higher, so there's competition there. LC Sign is not worried about China's shrinking labor force for now, but perhaps in the next 5 or 10 years, we'll face this problem, Zhu said. With his tariff regime, President Donald Trump is trying to convince American manufacturers to move out of China and back to the United States. But this effort will be hampered as companies flock to wherever labor is cheapest, which will probably not be in China. LC Sign is not worried about China's shrinking workforce for now, but perhaps in the next 5 or 10 years we'll face this problem. With his tariff regime, President Donald Trump is trying to convince American manufacturers to move out of China and back to the United States. But this effort will be hampered as companies flock to wherever labor is cheapest, which will probably not be in China. Yet, if China's manufacturing capacity collapses too quickly, other countries, India and Southeast Asia, elsewhere, will not have the time to build up their manufacturing capabilities and replace Chinese jobs, said Yi, the demographer. The result for consumers around the world, less efficient manufacturing and more inflation for goods such as iPhones and Nike sneakers. The impact for China will be even greater, Yi said. It will be a challenge for China's economy, politics, society, culture, and national security. It will be a comprehensive challenge. You see how they never really talk about the impact of the patriarchy and how men have simply jacked things up with their lack of foresight. They never address that in these types of things. That's okay. We'll continue to talk about it. Now, I'm posting this over here on TikTok, but I highly doubt that a Chinese social media platform will allow this to go anywhere. And that's okay. But we're going to continue to talk about it, even if these places, these countries never address their actual root causes of the way that their countries are in these find out seasons. And I'm here for it because it just speaks to how politics are personal and personal is politics. All right, join the conversation with this one. I love talking about these birth rate articles. They just keep coming. So this one's out of South Korea. We already know that they have the bottom. Their birth rate is down like near Satan's balls. So South Korea's 20s population is now smaller than their over 70-year-olds. So let's look at this article. This is from the Chosun Daily. It says, shrinking 20s workforce faces employment challenges, raising fears of economic slowdown and worsening population crisis. As the birth rate in aging population persists, the population in their 20s has sharply declined, falling below the number of those in their 70s and older for the first time. Once the largest adult age group, those in their 20s have decreased for 4 consecutive years and are now the smallest generation. Combined with the employment difficulties, concerns over a slowdown in economic vitality and a deepening population crisis are growing. According to the Population and Housing Census Registered Census Method, results released by the Ministry of Data and Statistics on the 12th, the population in their 20s last year was 6.3 million, a decrease from 193,000 from the previous year. During the same period, those in their 70s were counted at 6.54 million, exceeding the 20s by 241,000. 20s overtaken by those in their 70s and older. The population in their 20s is falling below those in the 70s and older, marks the first time in 100 years since related statistics began in 1925. The 20-year-old population peaked at over 70 million in 2020 and has since declined by 140,000 to 210,000 annually. Last year's decrease was the largest among all age groups, surpassing those under 10 years old, 192,000, and those in their 40s, 169,000. As of last year, the population by age group was led by those in their 50s at 8.7 million, followed by those in their 40s, 7.8 million, and those in their 60s, nearly 7.8 million as well. This contrasts sharply with 30 years ago, when those in their 20s was the largest age group. Weakening presence in labor market. The 20s population is shrinking while also being marginalized in the job market. In August, the employment rate for those in their 20s was 60.5%, down 1.2 percentage points from a year earlier. It has continued to decline or stagnate for 12 consecutive months since August of last year at 61.7%, failing to rebound even once. The unemployment rate for those in their 20s in August rose 1 percentage point to 5%, the highest in 3 years since 2022 at 5.4%. This is attributed to large companies increasing rolling recruitment of experienced hires instead of public recruitment, reducing job opportunities for 20s rookies entering society. According to a Federation of Korean Industry survey, 28.1% of new graduate hires at the top 500 companies by sales last year were experienced hires, up 2.3 percentage points from the previous year at 25.8%. A shortage of quality jobs due to U.S. tariff policies, shrinking manufacturing, and a construction slump is also exacerbating employment challenges for the 20-year-olds. Experts warn that if those in their 20s struggle to establish themselves in society, it could lead to further delays in marriage and childbirth, worsening the low birth rate problem. So, once again, and this is the end of the article. Once again, that's it. Nothing about how South Korean people can't stand women, can't stand mothers, have this anti-feminist sentiment. They never talk about the sociological issues that go on in these countries. Marriage delays are also going to be exacerbated because South Korea also has an extra patriarchal sentiment that props up boy children over girl children. So these countries will never, ever, 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 ever fix their issues because they don't address the root causes of their issues. Let me know what you think of this one. Like, comment, and share. And I'm pushing towards 100,000 over on YouTube.